What if I told you that the craziest conspiracy theories you've been mocking for years were actually real? Yeah, turns out the paranoid weirdos were right more often than your history teacher. Here are 42 conspiracies that turned out to be completely true, and you probably believed the cover-up. 1. You've been told your entire life that the government would never experiment on its own citizens without their knowledge or consent. That kind of thing only happens in authoritarian regimes, right? America respects human rights and would never treat people like lab rats. We're the good guys. Except the CIA ran a program called MKUltra from 1953 to 1973 that did exactly that. They dosed unwitting Americans with LSD and other psychoactive drugs to study mind control techniques. We're not talking about a few isolated incidents. This was a massive, organized program that tested on prisoners, mental patients, sex workers, and random citizens who had no idea they were being used as guinea pigs. The agency even set up fake brothels where they could slip drugs to unsuspecting Johns and watch through two-way mirrors. When the program was about to be exposed in 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered most of the records destroyed. We only know about MKUltra because some financial documents survived the purge. Your tax dollars at work, literally scrambling people's brains for science. 2. For decades, tobacco companies swore they had no idea cigarettes were harmful. They ran ads with doctors recommending their brands. They fought regulations by claiming the science was inconclusive. They portrayed themselves as innocent businessmen being persecuted by health fanatics who just didn't understand the research yet. Complete lie. Internal documents released during litigation proved tobacco executives knew cigarettes caused cancer and were addictive since the 1950s. They had their own scientists who confirmed it. But instead of warning the public or reformulating their products, they spent billions on propaganda campaigns designed to manufacture doubt. They paid scientists to produce favorable studies. They created front groups with scientific-sounding names to muddy the waters. They specifically targeted children and minorities with advertising because they needed replacement customers. You know, since their current customers kept dying of lung cancer. Documents showed executives literally discussing how to hook kids before they turned 18. They knew it killed you. That's why they advertised to kids. Lifetime customers don't live long enough to sue. 3. The United States government tells us it values informed consent and medical ethics above all else. We prosecuted Nazi doctors at Nuremberg for experimenting on people without permission. We have strict guidelines about human subjects research. America would never deliberately withhold medical treatment to study how a disease progresses in untreated patients. Wrong. From 1932 to 1972, the U.S. Public Health Service told 600 black men in Tuskegee, Alabama, that they were receiving free health care for bad blood. They weren't. Researchers were studying untreated syphilis to see what happened when the disease ran its course. Even after penicillin became the standard cure in 1947, they continued withholding treatment. For 25 years after a cure existed, they watched men go blind, insane, and die, all while telling them they were being treated. The men infected their wives. Children were born with congenital syphilis. All of it preventable. All of it deliberate. They watched people die for 40 years. For science. Then gave the lead researcher a commendation. 4. Watergate has been dismissed by some as just a botched burglary that got blown out of proportion by a liberal media looking to take down Nixon. Just some overzealous campaign workers who made a mistake. The president himself was barely involved, and the whole investigation was politically motivated theater. Nope. It was an organized criminal conspiracy orchestrated from the Oval Office. Nixon didn't just know about the break-in at Democratic National Committee headquarters. He ordered the cover-up and used the full power of the presidency to obstruct justice. White House tapes captured him discussing hush money payments to the burglars. He directed the CIA to stop the FBI's investigation. He had his staff destroy evidence and commit perjury. This wasn't a few rogue operatives. This was the President of the United States running a criminal enterprise out of the White House. The paranoid journalists who thought the conspiracy went all the way to the top were exactly right. Turns out when people said the president was corrupt, they meant it literally. The tapes don't lie. 5. You probably learned that the low-fat diet craze started because independent scientists discovered that dietary fat was causing America's heart disease epidemic. Doctors and nutritionists simply followed the evidence and recommended we cut fat from our diets. It was good science leading to sound public health policy. False. The sugar industry paid Harvard scientists approximately $50,000 in 1967, equivalent to nearly $400,000 today, to publish research that blamed saturated fat for heart disease instead of sugar. Internal documents revealed in 2016 by researchers at the University of California, San Francisco showed that the Sugar Research Foundation literally selected the studies to be reviewed, provided the article outlines, and received drafts for review before publication. The scientists weren't doing independent research. They were hired guns producing predetermined conclusions. This created the low-fat movement that led to decades of fat-free products loaded with sugar, actually making the obesity epidemic worse. They convinced you fat was the enemy while poisoning you with sugar. And you bought fat-free cookies by the box, wondering why you kept gaining weight. 6. The FBI is supposed to protect American citizens and uphold civil liberties. They're the good guys who catch criminals and keep us safe from threats. Sure, they might bend a few rules here and there, but they'd never illegally spy on, infiltrate, and actively sabotage peaceful political movements just because the government disagreed with them. Actually, they did exactly that for 15 years. The FBI's COINTELPRO program, which ran from 1956 to 1971, didn't just monitor civil rights groups, anti-war activists, and political organizations. They actively worked to destroy them from the inside. Agents infiltrated groups, spread false information to create infighting, and used propaganda to turn public opinion against activists. They sent Martin Luther King Jr. an anonymous letter suggesting he commit suicide before accepting his Nobel Peace Prize. They forged documents to make it look like activists were FBI informants, getting them ostracized or killed by their own movements. This wasn't passive surveillance. This was active psychological warfare against American citizens exercising their constitutional rights. The conspiracy theorists were right. The government really was out to get them. J. Edgar Hoover just called it counterintelligence. 7. When General Motors and other car companies added lead to gasoline in the 1920s, we're told they didn't know it was dangerous. Lead tetraethyl was presented as a miraculous anti-knock compound that made engines run better. If they'd known it was poisoning people, surely they would have stopped using it immediately. Completely false. Scientists warned about lead poisoning from the very beginning. Workers at the production facilities were dying, going insane, and suffering hallucinations. They called them loony gas buildings. General Motors and Standard Oil knew lead was toxic, but pushed it anyway because it was incredibly profitable, and they held the patent. They suppressed research showing the dangers, paid scientists to produce favorable studies claiming it was safe, and spent 50 years lobbying against regulations while poisoning entire generations. Even the scientist who invented leaded gasoline, Thomas Migley Jr., knew it was dangerous. He took a leave of absence to recover from lead poisoning after a publicity stunt where he inhaled lead vapors to prove it was safe. They knew it caused brain damage in children. They added it to gasoline anyway and fought regulation for half a century. Draw your own conclusions about corporate ethics. 8. The Vietnam War started because North Vietnamese torpedo boats launched an unprovoked attack on U.S. destroyers in the Gulf of Tonkin in August 1964. President Johnson had no choice but to escalate American involvement to defend our ships and protect our interests in Southeast Asia. That's what justified Congress passing the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. Never happened. The second attack that was used to justify the war was completely fabricated. President Johnson and Defense Secretary Robert McNamara knew within hours that the report was false, likely just sailors mistaking rough seas and radar malfunctions for enemy torpedoes. But they used it anyway to get congressional approval for massive escalation. NSA documents declassified in 2005 confirmed that the administration deliberately misled Congress and the American public. They wanted their war, so they created the justification out of thin air. 58,000 Americans and millions of Vietnamese died in a war that started with a lie. An entire war based on an attack that never happened. But sure, always trust the government when they say, we need to invade somewhere. 9. When the opioid epidemic exploded across America, we were told it was a tragic accident. Doctors didn't realize how addictive these new prescription painkillers were. Pharmaceutical companies were just trying to help people manage chronic pain. Nobody could have predicted that OxyContin would create millions of addicts. Total lie. Purdue Pharma knew OxyContin was highly addictive and deliberately misrepresented the risks. Internal documents revealed during litigation showed they understood that their 12-hour dosing didn't actually work for most patients, causing painful withdrawals that drove people to take more pills. Instead of reformulating the drug, they told doctors to prescribe higher doses. They paid bonuses to sales reps who got doctors to prescribe the most pills. They funded studies that downplayed addiction risks and created marketing materials claiming OxyContin was less addictive than other opioids. A complete fabrication. When people started dying, Purdue blamed the victims, calling them drug seekers and addicts who were abusing their medication. They made billions creating addicts, then blamed the addicts for getting addicted. The Sackler family got rich while people died. Some of them just paid fines and walked away. 10. Privacy advocates who warned that the government was collecting massive amounts of data on ordinary Americans without warrants were dismissed as paranoid conspiracy theorists. The government assured us they only surveilled people with probable cause. If you weren't doing anything wrong, you had nothing to worry about. Mass surveillance was something authoritarian regimes did, not democracies. Wrong. In 2013, Edward Snowden leaked classified NSA documents proving the agency was collecting phone records, emails, and internet activity on millions of Americans who had never been suspected of any crime. The PRISM program gave them direct access to data from Google, Facebook, Apple, and other tech companies. They collected everything: who you called, when you called them, how long you talked, where you were when you made the call. No warrants, no probable cause, no oversight. The conspiracy theorists who said Big Brother was watching weren't paranoid. They were paying attention. And the surveillance continues today, just with better PR. You called them paranoid. They called you naive. Snowden proved who was right, and the government called him a traitor for it. 11. Asbestos was banned from construction materials as soon as companies realized it caused cancer and other deadly lung diseases. They just didn't know how dangerous it was when they were putting it in schools, homes, and office buildings. Once the science became clear, responsible corporations stopped using it immediately. False. Companies knew asbestos caused lung cancer and mesothelioma since the 1930s. Internal memos from Johns Manville and other asbestos manufacturers show executives discussing how to hide research findings and suppress information about worker deaths. They paid scientists to produce studies casting doubt on the cancer link. They lobbied ferociously against any regulation. When workers started dying in massive numbers, companies blamed them for not wearing protective equipment the companies themselves often didn't provide. They kept selling asbestos for decades after knowing it killed people, because the lawsuits cost less than reformulating their products. They literally built elementary schools with material they knew caused cancer in children. Your third-grade classroom might have been lined with corporate-approved carcinogens. Sleep tight. 12. The Iran-Contra affair gets dismissed as partisan exaggeration. Just some overzealous Reagan administration officials who made questionable decisions in pursuit of foreign policy goals. Nothing rose to the level of actual conspiracy. Critics were just trying to manufacture a scandal. Nope. It was a genuine criminal conspiracy at the highest levels of government. The Reagan administration secretly sold weapons to Iran, which was under an arms embargo and actively holding American hostages. They then used the profits to illegally fund Contra rebels in Nicaragua after Congress explicitly prohibited it. National Security Advisor John Poindexter and Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North literally shredded documents to hide evidence. They lied to Congress under oath. Reagan himself claimed not to remember crucial details, conveniently avoiding perjury while maintaining plausible deniability. Multiple administration officials were indicted, and some were convicted before being pardoned by President Bush. They broke the law, destroyed evidence, lied under oath, and some of them got pardoned by the next guy. Justice is apparently optional when you're well-connected enough. 13. Oil and gas companies are just now learning about climate change along with the rest of us. When they funded research questioning global warming, they genuinely believed the science was uncertain. They were asking legitimate questions, not deliberately spreading misinformation. Complete lie. Exxon's own scientists warned executives about carbon dioxide emissions and global warming in 1977, nearly 50 years ago. Internal documents show they ran sophisticated climate models that accurately predicted temperature increases. They understood the risks perfectly, in detail, with scientific precision. Then they spent billions on propaganda denying climate change existed, funding think tanks and fake grassroots organizations to manufacture doubt, and lobbying against every environmental regulation. They used the exact same playbook the tobacco industry used to deny the cancer smoking link, sometimes hiring the same PR firms and scientists. They knew the planet was warming in the 70s, spent decades convincing you it wasn't. Now the ice caps are melting, and they're reporting record profits. 14. The FBI wouldn't waste federal resources spying on a musician, no matter how famous. John Lennon was just a pop star. Sure, he was politically outspoken, but the idea that the government viewed him as a serious threat worthy of surveillance is ridiculous conspiracy thinking. Actually, they did. The FBI maintained a 281-page file on John Lennon, tracking his every move, wiretapping his phone, and attempting to have him deported because President Nixon viewed his anti-war activism as a political threat during the 1972 election. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover personally oversaw the surveillance operation. They monitored his performances, infiltrated his circle, and documented his relationships. Documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests confirmed the entire operation was politically motivated. They wanted him out of the country before he could influence young voters against Nixon. Imagine being so threatened by Imagine that you deploy federal agents. They spent years surveilling a guy who wrote songs about peace. Your tax dollars funding the Beatles' surveillance state. 15. Las Vegas casinos were legitimate businesses from the beginning. Sure, organized crime had some influence in the early days, but the idea that the mafia literally owned and operated the Strip is Hollywood exaggeration. Movies like Casino and Goodfellas dramatize things for entertainment. Wrong. The mafia didn't just have influence. They built and ran Las Vegas. Meyer Lansky, Bugsy Siegel, and other mobsters created the modern casino industry. They skimmed millions in untaxed cash from casino counting rooms and sent it back to crime families in New York, Chicago, and Kansas City. They bribed politicians, judges, and law enforcement at every level. Anyone who interfered got buried in the desert. FBI wiretaps from the 1970s and testimony from mobsters who turned state's evidence proved it was all real. The skim, the murders, the corruption. The Nevada Gaming Commission was either complicit or incompetent. Casino and Goodfellas weren't exaggerating. They were practically documentaries. The only thing Hollywood got wrong was making it look glamorous instead of showing how many bodies were actually buried out in the desert. 16. The United States government respects the dead and would never secretly take body parts from deceased infants for scientific research without parental consent. That's the kind of horrific violation that only happens in dystopian fiction or authoritarian regimes. American ethics wouldn't allow it. They absolutely did. In the 1950s, Project Sunshine secretly harvested bones and organs from over 1,500 dead babies and children to study radiation exposure from nuclear testing. They didn't ask permission from parents. They didn't tell anyone what they were doing. Government agents worked with funeral homes and hospitals to remove tissue samples before burial, sometimes taking entire limbs or organ systems. Parents buried their children, never knowing pieces had been removed for atomic energy research. The program operated in multiple countries, and many families still don't know their babies were used as radioactive test subjects. They stole pieces of dead babies to study fallout from nuclear tests. Without consent. Without telling anyone. For science. And people wonder why trust in institutions is at an all-time low. 17. The Hollywood blacklist is often portrayed as paranoid exaggeration by communist sympathizers who faced minor career setbacks for their political beliefs. Studios didn't really maintain actual lists of people they refused to hire. The whole thing was overblown. Completely real. From 1947 through the 1960s, Hollywood studios literally maintained lists of writers, directors, actors, and other industry professionals suspected of communist ties or sympathies and systematically refused to hire them. Careers were destroyed based on accusations, rumors, or simply knowing someone who knew someone. Dalton Trumbo won 2 Academy Awards under pseudonyms because he couldn't work under his own name. Actors were named in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee and never worked again. People who refused to name names found themselves unemployable. The blacklist wasn't informal pressure. It was organized industry-wide suppression. They destroyed lives and careers over political beliefs and called it patriotism. Meanwhile, the people running the blacklist were the real un-American ones, shredding the First Amendment for applause. 18. Major pharmaceutical companies would never knowingly sell contaminated medical products that could infect people with deadly diseases. The regulatory system prevents that. If a company discovered their product was tainted with HIV, they'd immediately destroy it and alert authorities. They did the opposite. In the 1980s, Bayer discovered their hemophilia medicine, Factor VIII, was contaminated with HIV. Instead of destroying millions of dollars of inventory, they pulled it from the US and European markets where regulations were stricter and sold it in Asia and Latin America. Internal documents show executives knew patients would contract HIV and decided the profit was worth it. Thousands of hemophiliacs in countries like Japan, Malaysia, and Argentina were infected with a virus that would kill them. Bayer representatives continued selling the contaminated product for over a year after they had a safer version available. They knowingly infected thousands of people with HIV rather than lose money on contaminated inventory. Then they rebranded, paid some fines, and kept doing business. Nobody went to prison. 19. The crack cocaine epidemic that devastated inner-city communities in the 1980s was just a tragic social problem. Drug dealers brought crack into neighborhoods, and addiction spread. The idea that the government had anything to do with it is baseless conspiracy theory. Actually, there's substantial evidence of CIA involvement. Investigative journalist Gary Webb's Dark Alliance series showed that CIA-backed Nicaraguan Contra rebels sold cocaine to Los Angeles drug dealers, which was then converted to crack and flooded black neighborhoods. The CIA knew about the drug trafficking and allowed it to continue because they needed the Contras funded after Congress cut off official support. While direct CIA crack sales aren't proven, they facilitated and protected the pipeline. When Webb exposed this, the mainstream media destroyed his credibility, and he lost his career. Years later, a CIA Inspector General report confirmed much of what he'd reported. They flooded black neighborhoods with crack to fund a secret war in Central America. Then they launched the war on drugs and imprisoned the same people they'd helped addict. The cruelty was the point. 20. The food pyramid that guided American nutrition recommendations for decades was based purely on scientific research about what's healthiest for humans. Nutritionists and public health experts created it after careful study of dietary needs. It represented the best available science. Wrong. Agricultural industry lobbyists designed it to benefit their industries, not public health. The wheat lobby pushed for grains to form the foundation, despite limited evidence that 6 to 11 servings of bread and pasta daily was optimal. The dairy industry lobbied hard to make their products a separate essential category. USDA nutritionists who objected to the political influence were overruled by administrators who prioritized agricultural business interests. Internal documents show the pyramid was shaped more by what farmers wanted to sell than by what scientists knew people should eat. The government was supposed to protect public health, but instead created a marketing tool for agribusiness. They told you bread was the foundation of health because bread makers paid them to. You got fat following their advice. They got subsidies. Funny how that works. 21. The United States military would never seriously propose attacking American citizens and blaming it on a foreign power to justify war. That's the kind of false flag operation that only happens in conspiracy theories and thriller novels. Our military leaders would never consider such an unthinkable betrayal. They literally proposed exactly that. In 1962, the Joint Chiefs of Staff drafted Operation Northwoods, a plan to commit acts of terrorism against American citizens and military targets, then blame Cuba to justify an invasion. The proposals included bombing U.S. cities, sinking American ships, shooting down civilian aircraft, and staging violent attacks in Washington, D.C. and Miami. They suggested creating casualty lists of real Americans to make it believable. The document was signed by every member of the Joint Chiefs. President Kennedy rejected it, but the fact that America's top military leaders seriously considered murdering their own citizens is documented in declassified files. They planned to kill Americans to start a war. The only reason it didn't happen is one person said no. Sleep well, knowing that was the only thing standing between you and state-sponsored terrorism. 22. When generic drug versions take years to reach the market after patents expire, it's because of legitimate safety testing requirements and complex regulatory processes. Pharmaceutical companies aren't deliberately blocking cheaper alternatives. The delays are just bureaucratic necessity, mostly false. Big Pharma uses pay-for-delay agreements to literally bribe generic manufacturers not to release cheaper versions. Brand-name drug companies pay potential competitors hundreds of millions of dollars to keep generics off the market for additional years beyond patent protection. The Federal Trade Commission has called these deals illegal, but they keep happening because the profits are enormous. One deal involving the blood thinner Plavix cost consumers an estimated $900 million per year. The brand name company paid generic manufacturers to delay, split the monopoly profits, and everyone won except you. They pay their competitors not to compete with them. You pay the difference at the pharmacy counter. It's legal bribery disguised as business agreements, and it's costing you thousands. 23. The idea that wealthy American business leaders plotted to overthrow Franklin Roosevelt and install a fascist government is conspiracy theory nonsense. Respected industrialists and bankers wouldn't attempt a military coup in the United States. That's absurd. They tried. In 1933, a group of wealthy businessmen, including executives from J.P. Morgan, Goodyear, and DuPont, conspired to recruit retired Marine Corps Major General Smedley Butler to lead a coup against President Roosevelt. They wanted to install a fascist government modeled after Mussolini's Italy because they viewed FDR's New Deal as a threat to capitalism. They promised Butler an army of 500,000 veterans and financial backing. Butler, however, was a patriot who exposed the plot to Congress. The McCormick-Dickstein Committee investigated and confirmed the conspiracy was real. Their final report stated the plot was legitimate and serious. They literally plotted a fascist coup against a sitting president and faced zero consequences. Not one arrest, not one indictment. Just a congressional report that confirmed it happened, and then everyone moved on. 24. Agent Orange's devastating health effects on Vietnamese civilians and American veterans were an unfortunate surprise discovered only after the war ended. Monsanto and Dow Chemical didn't know their defoliant would cause cancer, birth defects, and lifelong health problems when they manufactured it. Nope. Internal Monsanto documents prove they knew Agent Orange caused serious health problems before it was ever used in Vietnam. Their own studies showed dioxin contamination caused cancer and severe birth defects in test animals. They sold it to the military anyway and never disclosed the risks. When veterans started getting sick and having children with devastating birth defects, the companies denied any connection for decades. They fought every lawsuit, suppressed research, and paid scientists to produce favorable studies. Millions of Vietnamese people were exposed, and 3 generations later, children are still being born with Agent Orange-related disabilities. They poisoned an entire country, knowing exactly what would happen. War crimes with receipts, then spent decades denying it, while people died and babies were born without limbs. 25. The Dalcon Shield intrauterine device was withdrawn from the market as soon as the manufacturer realized it caused serious health problems. The A.H. Robbins Company acted responsibly once they understood the risks. Medical device failures happen, but companies fix them when they learn the truth. They knew from the beginning. Internal memos show A.H. Robbins executives understood the Dalcon Shield's design made it prone to causing pelvic infections, infertility, septic abortions, and death. They received thousands of injury reports, but continued selling it for years. When lawsuits started piling up, they destroyed documents, paid experts to lie under oath, and fought victims in court using every dirty legal trick available. The device killed at least 20 women and seriously injured hundreds of thousands more before the company finally recalled it. When they couldn't hide from liability anymore, A.H. Robbins filed for bankruptcy protection to avoid paying victims. They sold a product they knew killed women, then destroyed evidence, then declared bankruptcy to dodge compensation. Some executives made millions while their victims got pennies on the dollar from the settlement fund. 26. Social media platforms show you content based on what you're interested in and what your friends post. The algorithms are neutral tools designed to enhance your experience by showing you relevant posts in chronological order. Companies like Facebook aren't deliberately manipulating what you see to provoke emotional responses. False. Internal documents leaked by whistleblowers, the Facebook papers, prove social media companies deliberately amplify divisive, angry, and inflammatory content because outrage drives engagement. Their own research showed that posts triggering negative emotions get significantly more clicks, shares, and time spent on platform. Facebook's algorithm actively prioritizes content that makes you angry, afraid, or outraged because those emotions keep you scrolling, which means more ad revenue. Documents show executives were warned that the algorithm was damaging mental health, increasing political polarization, and undermining democracy. They made minor tweaks but refused to fix it because anger is profitable. They're literally programming you to be angry for profit. The algorithm learns exactly what makes your blood boil and feeds you more of it. And it's working. You're angrier, more divided, and they're richer. 27. Companies that used radium in watch dial painting in the early 20th century genuinely didn't know it was dangerous when they hired young women to paint glow-in-the-dark numbers. Once they discovered the health risks, they stopped the practice and helped the affected workers. They knew. U.S. Radium Corporation and other companies understood radium was deadly, but told workers it was completely harmless. They instructed young women to lick their paintbrushes to maintain a fine point, despite knowing this ingested radium that would destroy their bones from the inside. Meanwhile, company scientists and executives used lead screens, protective equipment, and worked behind barriers to protect themselves from the same substance they claimed was safe. When workers started dying horrific deaths, their jaws literally disintegrating, bones breaking spontaneously, the companies denied responsibility, suppressed medical evidence, and fought legal battles for years to avoid paying compensation. Management wore lead protection while telling teenage girls radium was safe enough to put in their mouths. The workers died agonizing deaths. The managers went home to their families every night. 28. The CIA doesn't plant stories or control coverage in American news media. That would violate journalistic independence and press freedom. News organizations operate independently from government influence, and reporters would never knowingly serve as intelligence assets. Wrong. Operation Mockingbird ran from the 1950s through at least the 1970s, with the CIA recruiting journalists and placing assets in major news organizations to influence coverage and plant propaganda. Congressional investigations led by Senator Frank Church confirmed relationships between the CIA and reporters at the New York Times, CBS, Time Magazine, and virtually every major American news outlet. The agency paid journalists, provided them with classified information to make their reporting seem credible, and used them to spread disinformation. Some journalists were witting participants. Others were manipulated without knowing they were serving intelligence purposes. The Church Committee found the practice so pervasive they couldn't even identify all the compromised journalists. Your news was CIA approved. The Free Press had intelligence officers on the payroll. And when people said the media was controlled, everyone called them paranoid. Turns out they just read the declassified reports. 29. Volkswagen's emissions scandal was a terrible mistake made by rogue engineers who took shortcuts without authorization from leadership. The company didn't deliberately design software to cheat emissions tests. It was unauthorized wrongdoing by individuals. Deliberate fraud from the top. VW engineers didn't go rogue. They built defeat device software, specifically programmed to detect when cars were being tested and temporarily reduce emissions to legal levels. During normal driving, the same vehicles polluted up to 40 times the legal limit. This wasn't an oversight or mistake. It was systematic deception requiring coordination across multiple departments and approval from senior management. Internal emails show executives knew about the cheating and approved it. They sold 11 million vehicles worldwide with this fraudulent technology, marketing them as clean diesel while knowingly poisoning the air. They built software specifically designed to lie to regulators, then marketed the cars as environmentally friendly. But sure, trust corporations to police themselves and protect public health. 30. The Tuskegee Airmen faced the normal challenges any military unit would encounter during World War II. They succeeded through skill and determination, but the idea that military leadership actively tried to sabotage them to prove black pilots were inferior is overstated. Actually, they were deliberately set up to fail. Military officials gave the Tuskegee Airmen inferior aircraft, denied them adequate training resources, and created bureaucratic obstacles specifically designed to make them wash out. The War Department wanted to prove that black men couldn't be competent pilots. They assigned them to outdated planes while white units got newer models. They delayed deployment for months while white graduates went straight to combat. They denied promotions and gave them the most dangerous missions, hoping for high casualty rates. Despite every institutional barrier, the Tuskegee Airmen became one of the most decorated fighter groups in the war, with one of the lowest bomber loss rates of any escort group. They rigged every system to make them fail. The Tuskegee Airmen succeeded anyway and became legends. Imagine what they could have accomplished if the military had actually supported them instead of actively trying to destroy them. 31. Fast food is just convenient. Affordable dining for busy people. If it's addictive, that's because people lack willpower or make poor choices. The restaurants aren't deliberately engineering their food to be as addictive as possible. They're just making products people enjoy. Partly false. Food scientists are specifically employed by fast food companies to engineer what they call bliss points, precise combinations of salt, sugar, fat, and additives that trigger addiction-like responses in your brain. Industry documents show they deliberately design food to be hyperpalatable and difficult to stop eating. They study the exact ratios that light up pleasure centers and create cravings. It's not about taste. It's about neuroscience, weaponized for profit. Former industry insiders have testified that companies use the same behavioral psychology that casinos employ to keep gamblers pulling slot machine levers. They literally engineer food to hijack your brain's reward system and call it craveable. You call it lunch. Meanwhile, you wonder why you can't eat just one serving when the product was designed to make that impossible. 32. Violence at protests erupts organically when tensions run high. Protesters themselves turn violent, giving authorities legitimate reason to crack down. The government doesn't send in provocateurs to start trouble. That's paranoid conspiracy thinking, not always organic. Declassified COINTELPRO documents prove the FBI sent agents provocateurs into protest movements specifically to incite violence, giving them justification for arrests and crackdowns. They paid informants to throw rocks, start fights, and vandalize property. When peaceful protesters were beaten by police, it was sometimes because federal agents had deliberately created chaos. Documents show they targeted anti-war groups, civil rights organizations, and political activists using these tactics. When protesters pointed at someone and said, "That guy's a Fed," they were sometimes absolutely correct. They sent in people to start violence, filmed the chaos they created, then blamed the protesters and used it as justification for mass arrests. Classic problem reaction solution, government edition. 33. When pharmaceutical companies conduct clinical trials, they publish all the results so doctors and patients can make informed decisions about medications. The scientific process ensures transparency. Negative results get published just like positive ones. Wrong. Drug companies routinely bury studies showing their products don't work or cause serious harm. They're only required to register trials, not publish results. Industry-funded research showing negative outcomes mysteriously never makes it to medical journals, creating massive publication bias. A study published in the New England Journal of Medicine found that 94% of antidepressant trials with favorable results were published, while only 14% of trials with negative results saw publication. Doctors prescribe medications based on incomplete, cherry-picked data because the inconvenient studies stay locked in filing cabinets. The studies showing drugs don't work or cause harm. Those stay in a drawer. The ones showing benefits, published everywhere and cited repeatedly. Your doctor doesn't have the full picture because half the evidence is hidden. 34. The government was honest with Americans about the Vietnam War. Officials might have been overly optimistic about progress, but they weren't systematically lying. The anti-war movement exaggerated government deception to support their political agenda. Complete lie. The Pentagon Papers, 7,000 pages of classified documents leaked by Daniel Ellsberg, revealed that 4 consecutive presidents systematically lied to the American public about Vietnam from the very beginning. They knew the war was unwinnable as early as 1965, but escalated anyway. They lied about the Gulf of Tonkin incident. They lied about casualty counts and body counts. They lied about progress and military objectives. Internal assessments showed hopelessness, while public statements promised victory. They sent 58,000 Americans to die in a war they privately admitted couldn't be won. They lied about everything for over a decade. Sent teenagers to die in a war they knew was lost. Then prosecuted the guy who told the truth and called him a traitor. 35. Insurance claim denials are based on legitimate medical necessity reviews conducted by qualified professionals examining each case individually. If your claim gets denied, it's because treatment wasn't medically appropriate. The system is designed to prevent unnecessary procedures. Nope. Health insurance companies use computer algorithms designed to automatically deny claims, knowing most people won't appeal. Internal documents from major insurers reveal they have informal denial quotas and bonus structures for claims adjusters who reduce payouts. The algorithms flag claims for denial based on cost, not medical necessity. Some companies target the most expensive patients, people with cancer or chronic conditions, for aggressive denials. Doctors employed by insurance companies have testified they're pressured to deny claims without fully reviewing medical records. One investigation found that some insurers denied claims without any physician review at all. You pay premiums for years. A computer programmed to save money denies your claim in seconds. A doctor you've never met rubber stamps the denial. Welcome to American healthcare, where profits beat patients every time. 36. FDA approval means a drug has been thoroughly tested and proven safe through rigorous, independent scientific review. The agency would never approve medications under pharmaceutical industry pressure. If the FDA says it's safe, you can trust that assessment completely. Not always. The FDA has repeatedly approved drugs under industry pressure that later killed thousands of people. Vioxx, a painkiller approved in 1999, killed an estimated 60,000 Americans before being withdrawn. Internal FDA emails released during litigation showed agency scientists warned about cardiovascular dangers before approval, but were overruled by higher-ups with close industry ties. The revolving door between pharmaceutical companies and FDA leadership creates conflicts of interest. Officials approve drugs, knowing they might get lucrative jobs at the same companies later. Multiple whistleblowers have testified that scientific concerns get buried when they threaten profitable drugs. The watchdog is funded by the companies it's supposed to watch. FDA user fees, paid by drug makers, provide nearly half the agency's budget. Shockingly, approval rates went up after that funding started. Pure coincidence, obviously. 37. Major banks would never knowingly process money for drug cartels. They have compliance departments and anti-money laundering systems to prevent that. If cartels managed to use banking systems, it was because they tricked the banks, not because institutions deliberately looked the other way. They did. Repeatedly. HSBC, Wachovia, and other major banks were caught laundering billions of dollars for Mexican drug cartels and admitted to it. HSBC moved at least $881 million for the Sinaloa and Norte del Valle cartels. Wachovia processed $378 billion in suspicious transactions. Their own compliance staff warned executives in writing that they were handling drug money. Management ignored the warnings because the fees were too profitable. When finally caught, HSBC paid a fine of $1.9 billion, equal to about 5 weeks of profit. No executives went to jail. They laundered money for cartels that murdered tens of thousands of people. The punishment? A fine they made back in a month. Too big to fail. Too big to jail. Too profitable to stop. 38. When you turn off location tracking on your phone, companies stop tracking your location. Privacy settings actually work. Tech companies respect user choices about data collection because violating those preferences would be illegal. False. Multiple investigations prove companies like Google continue collecting location data even when users explicitly disable tracking. They use Wi-Fi networks, Bluetooth, cell tower triangulation, and other methods to track you anyway. An Associated Press investigation in 2018 confirmed that Google services on both Android and iPhone store your location even when location history is paused. Your privacy settings are suggestions they feel free to ignore. Internal documents from Facebook showed they tracked users who deleted their accounts and collected data on people who never signed up at all. They give you a button labeled, "Don't track me." It's decorative. Theater to make you feel in control while they track every movement. Then, they act shocked when people don't trust big tech. 39. America's public transportation systems declined naturally as people chose the convenience and freedom of personal automobiles. The shift to car-dependent cities was driven by consumer preference, not corporate conspiracy. Public transit just couldn't compete. Nope. General Motors, Firestone Tire, Standard Oil, and other companies conspired to buy up and dismantle streetcar systems in over 45 cities across America. Through front companies like National City Lines, they purchased electric trolley networks, ripped up the tracks, and replaced them with buses, which conveniently required tires, gasoline, and regular replacement. The goal was to eliminate public transit and force car dependency. They were criminally convicted in federal court in 1949 of conspiracy to monopolize transit systems. The punishment? $5,000 in corporate fines. Some executives paid $1 personally. They destroyed functional public transportation in dozens of cities, got convicted of criminal conspiracy, and the fine was less than a new Cadillac cost. Cities are still gridlocked with traffic 80 years later because of a conspiracy that's in the history books. 40. Scientology's claims about infiltrating government agencies are paranoid persecution fantasy. The idea that they planted thousands of agents in federal offices is ridiculous exaggeration. They're a controversial religion, but the infiltration conspiracy is too far-fetched. Actually happened. Operation Snow White in the 1970s was the single largest infiltration of the United States government in history. Scientology planted 5,000 covert agents in 136 government agencies, including the IRS, FBI, Coast Guard, and Justice Department. They stole tens of thousands of classified documents, planted wiretaps, and committed systematic espionage. This isn't disputed. 11 high-ranking Scientology officials, including L. Ron Hubbard's wife, were convicted and imprisoned for their roles. FBI raids recovered massive documentary evidence. It's not a theory. It's court-documented fact. They infiltrated the government on a scale that would make spy novelists blush, got caught red-handed, and now enjoy tax-exempt religious status. Multiple leaders went to prison. The organization is still around. Justice is weird sometimes. 41. Climate change skepticism arose organically from legitimate scientific debate. Some scientists genuinely questioned the consensus, and a healthy discussion emerged about the causes and severity of global warming. The climate denial movement represents sincere scientific disagreement. False. Fossil fuel companies created and funded the entire climate denial industry. Documents prove ExxonMobil, Shell, and other oil giants understood climate science perfectly in the 1970s. Their own researchers warned them about carbon emissions and global warming. Instead of acting on that knowledge, they copied the tobacco industry's playbook word for word. They funded fake think tanks with scientific-sounding names. They paid scientists to manufacture doubt. They created astroturf organizations that looked like grassroots movements. Internal memos used phrases like reposition global warming as theory rather than fact, and discussed victory as making climate science appear controversial. The entire debate was manufactured by companies that knew climate change was real. They knew the planet was heating up in the 70s, spent billions convincing you it wasn't real. Now, the evidence is undeniable, and they're posting record profits while the Arctic melts, and people still quote their propaganda. 42. The United States government would never secretly test radiation on pregnant women without their knowledge or consent. That crosses every ethical line. Even during the Cold War, American scientists wouldn't experiment on expectant mothers like they were lab animals. They absolutely did. From 1945 to 1947, researchers working on the Manhattan Project gave pregnant women radioactive iron supplements as part of nutrition studies without telling them the iron was radioactive. The women thought they were receiving regular prenatal vitamins to help their pregnancies. They were actually human test subjects in radiation absorption experiments. Scientists wanted to study how radioactive materials moved through the body and crossed the placental barrier. The women had no idea they were being exposed to radiation, and neither did their babies. This wasn't discovered until the 1990s, when a congressional investigation uncovered the experiments. Some of the women had already died. Their children grew up never knowing they'd been exposed to radiation in the womb. They fed pregnant women radiation to see what would happen, called it science. The mothers thought they were taking vitamins. Turns out the conspiracy theorists weren't paranoid enough. They didn't imagine it went this far. So the next time someone calls you a conspiracy theorist for questioning official narratives, show them this list. Sometimes the paranoid people are just the ones paying attention. If this made you question everything you've been told, hit that like button and subscribe, because there are plenty more lies where these came from. Drop a comment with which one shocked you most, and I'll see you in the next video where we expose even more uncomfortable truths.